Hello and welcome to the FT's live business clinic. I'm Claire Barrett, personal finance editor, and today I'm going to be hopefully answering some taxing questions. Now, FT Money published a huge article at the weekend looking into how tax rises in the UK could come into force later to pay for the pandemic. Now, there are estimates already that the UK budget deficit could stretch to £337 billion. And speculation is mounting that the UK Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, could be tempted to raise taxes on individuals, perhaps on businesses, and as well as increasing borrowing to make up that shortfall. Now, last week, there was a leaked Treasury document that appeared to show the government was considering steps, including raising income tax and potentially ending the triple lock on the state pension. Now, both of those measures would break pledges that the government made in its manifesto when it was elected last year. The government says it's much too early to speculate on how taxes could rise in future, but we suspect that a lot of work is currently going on behind the scenes, looking into what could happen, and that is exactly what we are going to be talking about with you today. Now, I am not alone. I'm joined by the ever-capable Nimesh Shah, who is a partner at Blick Rothenberg, and also somebody who comes into the FT, I think, Nimesh, pretty much for the last 10 years. You've been with us on budget day, in the newsroom, right in the thick of the action, looking at the consequences of changes on tax policy. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Claire. No, thanks for having me. It's been doing a fair amount of thinking since Rishi stood up a few months ago and announced all the measures, and I thought to myself, how are we going to pay for this? Borrowing's one thing, but the other side of it for the government will be naturally tax rises. So it's been getting me thinking about what Rishi could do over the next 12 months or so.
Okay, so you can put your questions to me and Nimesh very easily. If you're watching this on the ft.com website, you can just comment on the bottom of the article. We've already had quite a few comments already. They'll get sent to me, as if by magic, by the FT video team on my iPad. Also, if you're watching us on YouTube, or the many people who are now watching us every week on LinkedIn, hello to all of you, you can also comment on the live stream function, and we'll see that, and we can address your questions as things go along. So, Nimesh, firstly, just to set this into context, you're not the only tax expert to think this, but it seems to your mind that the burden is going to fall probably more heavily on wealthy individuals than on businesses because of the pressure to keep the economy going.
Well, I think firstly, it's inevitable that tax rises need to happen in some form, and with the amount of support that the government's given so far for businesses and the inevitable recession that we're going to have, they don't want to squeeze businesses and also turn off the taps on jobs and discourage employment as well as we come through this. So where do you look to taxes? And easy taxes to raise for the government are certainly income tax, national insurance, VAT, the taxes which are subject to the triple lock. And then you look to those with, to coin the phrase, the broader shoulders as well. There is a population out there that the government will look to ease some of that burden. But I can see there being sort of a universal increase on taxes across the board because most people would accept that. And where you're going to do that is probably through income taxes and NIC, certainly to begin with.
Okay, and certainly there was a YouGov poll a couple of weeks ago where the majority of the public actually said that they would support some kind of windfall tax in order to pay for some of these measures. Now, just to frame the debate slightly, a question from FT reader Pseudonym, who asks, well, why do taxes need to rise? There's no interest burden with the debt that the government is issuing because interest rates are so low, and taxes could decrease demand, which the economy will presumably need. And that point is also backed up by James Mason, who's just commented on LinkedIn. Thank you, James. And he says, well, if this debt is racked up, if inflation rises, then it could inflate some of the debt away. But I think there is a feeling that, A, the Chancellor kind of needs to boost his credibility, if you like, with tackling that deficit by having some tax rises to contribute to paying off the bill. But also, it's an opportunity frankly, for him to roll up his sleeves and reform areas of the UK tax system that have eluded his predecessors, notably Philip Hammond. Who can forget the white van man budget a few years ago when he tried to reform national insurance contributions and it spectacularly backfired?
Yeah, no, I think there is a balance between rising taxes and borrowing, and also budget responsibility as well. And as I completely agree with you, Claire, that this is an opportunity for the government and Rishi Sunak to say that there has been an obvious crisis here, which can be plugged with some level of tax increases. So it's an opportunity for Rishi to really look at the tax system as well, and make it fit for purpose in what will be, well, everyone's coining the phrase, the new world. And he can look to have a roadmap of tax changes as well. It's not necessarily just increases, but changes to make the system fit for purpose as we come through this.
Absolutely. Now, we've got a question from Rajib on LinkedIn. Hi, Rajib. He says, how much of a rise in income tax could we be expecting? I mean, you do think that it will be, a low percentage, but possibly that higher rate taxpayers, that percentage could rise.
Yeah, I think some of the speculation over the last sort of 2 weeks or so has said putting a penny on every tax band. So that doesn't raise a huge amount. So I could see certainly, this universal increase across the board affecting everyone because we're all in it together. But then higher increases at the top end. So reintroducing the 50% rate of income tax. So currently 45, going up to 50 at the top end. So again, the wealthier are bearing that burden a bit more.
Now, I thought that your prediction on national insurance in the article last weekend was also very interesting. Now, we don't want to lose the audience at this point, but if you are a higher rate taxpayer, i.e. somebody who earns more than £50,000 in the UK, then the proportion of your earnings over that which go to national insurance are quite low, only 2%. Whereas the bracket below it, national insurance is charged at 12% roughly. Now, Nimesh, you think that a sort of a slightly underhand way, perhaps, of increasing income tax could be to raise that national insurance threshold for the higher earners, and that could cost somebody quite heavily in the pay packet.
Yeah, no, and let's be honest, national insurance is just another tax. So the effective rate of tax for someone earning over 50,000 is 42%. It's 40% income tax plus 2% national insurance, whereas someone who's a basic rate taxpayer is paying 32%. So by removing that threshold, that upper earnings limit, and making it a 12% rate of national insurance on earnings over 50,000, that could be quite a sizable revenue generator for the government. And some of the numbers that we crunched, Claire, said someone who was earning 100,000 would be £5,000 worse off after taxes and national insurance on net pay. So that would be one way. Certainly, I could see national insurance and income tax being harmonised as well. It's something that the government and the Treasury have talked about as well, having these two systems which are broadly aligned, but there are lots of nuances there between rates and how things are taxed. Some things are nicked and some things aren't. It would be, again, another great opportunity to really to align those two taxes.
And certainly it could even result in a small giveaway for the lower earners, because national insurance contributions start to kick in at around the £9,500 mark, whereas income tax you don't pay until you've exceeded your personal allowance, which is around £12,500. Now, we're going to move things on slightly here. I've got lots of questions coming in about pensions, which we're going to cover, and also a wealth tax, so stay online if you've asked one of those. But before we leave national insurance behind completely, the Chancellor did have a bit of a sabre-rattling warning for the self-employed when he announced that there was going to be an income support scheme for self-employed people in April. That, importantly, has started paying out this week. He warned self-employed people that national insurance and the way that they are taxed would have to be
employed, and has been for some time. And again, when Rishi Sunak stood up about a month or so ago now and announced the self-employed income support scheme, it came with a warning that really they're going to have to pay for that support as well. And again, it's the opportunity coming back that this is a chance for Rishi Sunak to change the self-employment tax regime. At the moment, we have this differential on national insurance for the self-employed, so ignoring those that operate through a limited company, but there's those on a like-for-like basis. So we could see the national insurance rate for the self-employed being aligned to that for the employed worker, and that would cost someone around £1,200 of net earnings for someone earning about £60,000 per year. But again, that doesn't cover those that are operating through limited companies. But we've got the dreaded IR35 changes that have been deferred until next year, and those I think will certainly be put back on the table because that again has been a bit of a thorn in the government's side over many years, where they've looked to that population of people and how they could align again the tax differential between the employed worker and the self-employed, and particularly those running through companies.
Absolutely. And on the subject of IR35, there is an amendment and a vote being tabled in the House of Commons this afternoon by David Davis to look at deferring IR35 for much longer. We will be watching that. Now, Chris has commented, having reviewed my angling license today, good timing, Chris, I have discovered that because I'm over 65, I enjoy a reduced rate. Well, congratulations. But he says, I'm self-employed, and as I still work, I don't pay national insurance. So my pennyworth is to suggest apply national insurance to all earned income and remove the older person subsidies. Well, very magnanimous of you, Chris, to suggest this. Nimesh, do you think that this quirk in the tax system could be one way for the Chancellor to increase the tax take?
It's not impossible. Personally, I don't think he would go that far. I think one of the benefit of national insurance, or the whole logic behind national insurance, is that it's there to pay for our services, and that includes supporting the retired as well, who have paid for income tax and NIC throughout their working lifetime. So to remove that 65-year-old threshold would go against that sort of long-standing policy. But I say all bets are off, as I said at the very start. So don't rule it out, but personally, I think there's other more low-hanging fruit that the Chancellor may go after.
And on that subject, pensions. Now, Per Odsterlik on LinkedIn has not very happy about the idea that the triple lock could be ended. Now, for anyone wondering what on earth that is, so the triple lock governs how much the UK state pension rises every year. It will either be by earnings growth, by inflation, or 2.5%, whichever is the higher, hence triple lock. Now, he says, by ending the triple lock, pensioners over 70 will be hit harder than any other age group. Why would the government risk breaking a manifesto pledge? I mean, obviously, there's lots of money at stake from the triple lock. What's your feeling, Nimesh, on this tax in future?
Yeah, well, the pension cost is high. I think it's no secret there, and at the moment, the government is shackled with this triple lock on what they can really do with taxes and also with the pension side of things as well. So again, I would say that no one would have any objections if that was thrown out the window, so that if the government does have that flexibility on increasing certainly income tax, NIC and VAT, because you can play around with those quite easily. It's a good way of getting cash flow as well into the government. Let's not forget that just like any business, cash is really important, and cash flow into the Treasury coffers is what the government will want to see. So doing that through with the triple lock in place, it's really difficult to manoeuvre around that without either introducing new taxes or certainly making a lot of changes to a lot of different taxes. So again, I can just see it being tabled in the government in the not too near future that, look, we have to rescind that triple lock.
And certainly the future direction of inflation will weigh quite heavily on that decision. We might see inflation fall in the meantime, which makes the final third of the 2.5% look quite high. But then in the future, if inflation rises, as some are predicting, then the government could be left open to some pretty substantial increases. Now, staying on pensions for a second before we move on to wealth tax, FT reader Liberty London asks, would now be a good time to move from giving tax relief on pensions contributions to the pension ISA model, under which pensions contributions come from your tax income, but withdrawals further down the line can be made free of tax. Now, just a pause for a second there. That was a policy which George Osborne had considered a few years ago when he was the Chancellor, as part of wider efforts to reform pension tax relief. Now, we know from the last budget, everyone was bracing themselves in the newsroom to be expecting higher rate tax relief on pensions to be taken away. It wasn't then. So could this fall into the category of being quite a helpful time for the Chancellor to make some unpopular changes?
Again, yeah, I think that it costs such a huge amount. The number is out there, so it's got to be a consideration to remove higher rate relief. And also the way that pensions reform has happened over the last few years, where you have this tapered annual allowance, the actual benefit of higher rate relief for the higher earner has diminished greatly. So right at the top end, you're restricted on how much tax relief you can get to now, £4,000. So it wouldn't be a huge amount to take away, certainly at the right top end. It will squeeze the middle earner, certainly. But there is a move then, again, going back to cash flow, that the government will want to reduce the cost of high rate relief now so that it has a more of an inflow coming in. And you could see that Osborne policy coming back to the table, that the whole pensions regime turning on its head and becoming this sort of more universal ISA regime as well. We know that Osborne really favoured the ISA, the £20,000 limit was his idea. And people understand the ISA as well. Let's not forget that. It's a simple concept. It's increased in popularity over the years. Even now, the junior ISA is quite valuable as well. Pensions have just become riddled with complexity.
You can pay into a junior ISA per year now.
Yeah, £9,000. So I know my niece will be very happy with that, who's accruing some nice ISA benefits over the years. So yeah, it's almost doubled for her. So
staying with the wealth tax now, Grim Up North, great moniker on ft.com, is saying COVID-19 is hopefully a one-off shock to the economy, although I would caveat that with we don't know how big a shock it's going to be. Certainly the jobs figures out today were very depressing. Is it time for a one-off wealth tax of, say, 1 to 2% of everyone's wealth to be paid over an extended period to avoid, to claw back the COVID losses? Now, Grim Up North says this will be painful, but it could be shouldered by those with the most wealth. Now, there are plenty of other comments, I should add, coming in from all channels of people who are quite fearful of a wealth tax and how it could work, but there are also people who are in support of it. For example, Zoe M on LinkedIn says we all need to proportionally pay a little more to cover the NHS and the social care. The impact of the furlough should be spread over a longer period and not forced on the public to cover in the short term when we are likely to enter a recession. Well, great points there from the readers. Nimesh, over to you. What do you think a wealth tax could?
Yeah, lots of good points, lots to think about. We could carry on all day about just the wealth tax alone. And I wouldn't say it needs to be a one-off. If the government are going to go to the pain of having a completely new tax, and lots of questions get asked about what should it look like, what should the rate be, how do you collect it, then it would be a lot of wasted work if you're just going to have it for a few years. So if the government are going to go down that route, then I can see it coming in and staying for some time. If you're looking at a tax to how do you pay for this crisis and the recession that's forthcoming, then you would probably play around more with income taxes over a short period of time and give, again, if the government should give a roadmap on what that would look like so people have visibility. But going back to the wealth tax, it's been something that's been proposed by the opposition governments for some years. It could be set at a threshold of, say, £1 million or £2 million on maybe just on the second home, for example. Property taxes, a wealth tax on property would probably be palatable in some degree. But there are lots of questions on how that should operate and what asset classes it should even apply on. And the big problem with a wealth tax is how do people pay it? Because some people are very asset rich, especially high London property prices, where do you get the cash flow to actually pay that tax every year, even if it is set at a relatively low rate? And if you compare sort of other countries around the world that do have a wealth tax, it ranges somewhere between about 0.5% and 5% as well.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for those comments, Nimesh. Now, obviously, one of the biggest problems with the wealth tax would be how do you find the assets that you're going to levy the tax on? So lots of readers who commented on the original article have kind of focused on the idea of property, because property assets are much easier to find and clearly easier to value. So FT reader EMR says, hi both, do you think they will finally go after property wealth, not perhaps in the form of a flat wealth tax, but more of a recurring slice system, which will reduce property prices? And we have another comment on property from Eric McKeegan on LinkedIn. He says the UK needs a land value tax. Again, another method of taxing property. But then counter to all of this, there are suggestions coming in from other readers who may or may not be property professionals, saying that, well, if you want the property market to restart again, it's emerging from a couple of months where transactions have been virtually impossible to put through because of the bar on physical viewings and valuations. Really, the Chancellor should consider cutting property taxes to get things going again.
Yeah, you've got to be careful around too much tax on property. It's already if the most, if not the most, taxed asset that we have in the UK when you think about all the taxes that apply to property. And I always ask the question every budget, what more can they do on property as well? My own view is I think we do need some kind of reduction on certainly SDLT. I said to you, Claire, the other week when we were talking that the silver bullet certainly is to get rid of the 3% SDLT surcharge on second homes. That would be a huge psychological barrier that would be removed for the property market to get things moving again. But again, it raises so much revenue and has done since its introduction a few years ago, that where do you then pay for that? I could see a reduction in SDLT at a level below 750,000, but then balanced with an increase at values above that amount or slightly higher, but then abolishing the 3% completely. Let's not forget as well that a new SDLT rate comes in next year for foreign buyers, which may not have been factored into some of these calculations as well. So
actually come into effect. We'll leave that one for a minute. So keep watching, because we will come back to that question and answer it. It's a very good one. But a couple of sort of international thoughts. We've got lots of people on LinkedIn who are saying hello from all over the world. I can't say hello back to you all individually, but hello to you. We're delighted that you are watching us. And we're hearing from Tony Mason on LinkedIn about what's going on in Germany. Now, I don't know, Tony, if you're in Germany or if you're just a fan of Germany. I certainly am. He says, I wonder if we'll see a 1% increase in income tax to support the NHS. Very good branding there. You can probably get anything through if you say it's to help the NHS. And a new social care tax, limited perhaps to the over 40s, which is what they are considering in Germany. So, I mean, obviously the problem of paying for social care, this has been something that people have been talking about, directing policy at for a long time before the pandemic even became upon us, Amesh. But a new social care tax, is now the time, do you think, that the Chancellor could consider rolling something like that out?
Perfect timing, and the sentiment is certainly there to have a new tax. As I said before, it's complicated to introduce a completely new tax. So it could be something like a surcharge on the existing tax regime that we have in the UK. So basically take your total income and gains over the year and then just apply an NHS surcharge on all of that. The US has something similar for supporting the medical system there as well. And again, this is a good opportunity to table something like that.
Now, another comment from an international commentator on LinkedIn, Daniel Lopez Sola. He says, Nimesh, do you think we're at the beginning of a new stage of tax increases across many countries in the world?
Again, I don't think the UK is any different to other countries in the world. I'm sure the governments are looking at it and saying that this situation that we've faced over the last few months is an opportunity. I wouldn't say necessarily, again, increases. I think we can get confused with increases and changes into the tax system as well. But our tax system, and I'm sure many others around the world, are historic and archaic in some facets. I know certainly for the UK, IHT is well due a reform, and I would look at this now and say, if I was in the Treasury and Rishi Sunak, that certainly there's an opportunity to change lots of bits of the tax code. And yes, there could be some increases as a result, and which people will absorb because of the situation that we faced.
Okay, so the next question, now these are a bit more business orientated. FT Reader 2 Golden asks, do you think there'll be an increased tech tax for tech companies, which is a very pertinent question because, of course, the likes of Amazon have been doing quite well out of the pandemic, although they claim their costs have risen to offset that. And Alex R on LinkedIn says, what about taking on the internet giants so that they pay their fair share of the tax burden? Well, again, a topic that previous chancellors have tried to deliver on, increasing taxes on internationally on big internet companies. Any chance of that happening, do you think, Nimesh?
Well, the UK has been at the forefront of taxes on multinationals and tech-based companies. We've had something called the diverted profit tax that was introduced. Some of the revenue may not have sort of filtered through into the Treasury coffers as yet because it's relatively new. But I'd say the UK is a model when it comes to taxing those giants. Do I see any new things coming through in the UK? Again, probably not, for the same reasons that I started with. The government doesn't necessarily want to apply lots of new taxes to businesses because that's what's going to really kickstart the economy. And whether you're large or small, it'll have some kind of trickle-down effect as well. So I would say unlikely right now, and partly because of the reason that the UK has done quite a lot in that area already.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to read out a couple of comments now from readers. Faisal Hani on LinkedIn says the easiest way to avoid a depression is to increase taxes for everyone earning over £150,000, a wealth tax for liquid assets over £500,000. Siri is joining in. Good Lord. A mansion tax of over £2 million. That would correct the last 10 years of income inequality. Well, great comment there from Faisal. I'm going to also turn to YouTube. We've had a few humdingers on the YouTube chat. Robert Chapman points out we have cut corporation tax from 26% to 19% in the UK over the last decade, and that has led to a big increase in tax receipts and new businesses. We should be cutting, not raising tax on businesses. And another comment from Robert, he says it's all very good raising taxes in the name of the NHS, but there's a risk the government will do it again and again and again. When do we stop? Nimesh, do you want to come back on any of those points that readers have raised?
No, great point from the person who mentioned about corporation tax going down. And again, back to the theme of we really do need to support businesses over the next 12, 18 months and beyond. The UK has a great corporate regime. And don't forget, it was actually it was in our law that the rate was going to drop from 19 to 17 as well before Boris stuck his nose in and said we wouldn't be doing that. But I think it'd be a step too far to reduce it even further below 19 at this point in time.
Okay, and then a question before I go to our last question. Do we think, I can't find the reader who asked it. Oh, sorry, FT Reader DATS says, how likely, Nimesh, is it that companies who've received government help, for example, to furlough staff, will be expected to repay this in some form in the future via the tax system? That's a bit of a chin scratcher, I would say, because they're the companies really that stand to be the most affected by this going forwards.
Yeah, and an important point to mention is that the furlough payments are grants, so they are, in theory, taxable. So whilst these businesses have received some money, some of it's going to go back to the government in the form of taxation anyway. I would say my own view would be it'd be highly controversial if the government pinpointed on those businesses that have accessed this scheme, and as you alluded to, Claire, that those are the ones that were in the need of the greatest amount of support. It is a chin scratch to say what, if anything, the government may do for those businesses that have a bit more stability. I think it'd be unfair. I think there'd be outcry amongst the wider business community if you started singling people out and having means tested taxes on certain businesses, and it, again, be very complicated as well, which we want to avoid.
Certainly. Okay, so we'll move on to our final question now. Gregory Allen from YouTube, thank you for asking this. He says, what kind of timescale could we be looking at for any of these things to happen? So Nimesh, asking you to draw on your crystal ball and all of the powers contained within, how do you foresee this could pan out for us in the future?
Again, despite the protests from Treasury and government that nothing's going on, I'd be amazed if a lot of work isn't happening right now. I personally see that there'll be a statement of some kind, if not a mini budget, before the summer by Rishi Sunak to set out some consultations, ideally, get input from stakeholders on what those the changes should look like. That's really important. Then followed by what I would be calling a bumper budget in the autumn time, so around October, November, with then the likelihood that we'll see some changes come through from the 6th of April 2021. If we're introducing new taxes or big changes on existing regimes, then those changes, those physical changes, could be pushed back to the following tax year 2022. But the government needs to get a move on as well, because there is a lag between making changes and then actually getting the money in. So I don't think anyone will want to hang around on this. And I say I'm looking forward to seeing what will happen in the summer, and then also definitely in the winter as well, in the autumn and the winter as well.
Okay, well, so there you have it. That is the prediction from Nimesh Shah at Blick Rothenberg. He thinks we'll get some kind of statement on the direction of travel with taxes in the summer and a bumper autumn budget. Well, Nimesh, I'm sure, but I really hope that by the time the autumn budget comes around, we'll be able to be back in the FT newsroom and have you there, as always, to give your views on what's happening. Thank you very much for joining us today, Nimesh Shah from Blick Rothenberg. We won't be here next week, next Tuesday, for the live video slot because it's a bank holiday on Monday in the UK. So we're going to take a little break, but we will be back the Tuesday after at noon to answer a different topic, questions on a different topic pertaining to small businesses. And certainly, yes, lots of people have been asking on YouTube and LinkedIn, are there any updates on how limited company directors could be helped by the Chancellor? Well, sadly, I have nothing new to report on that score, but we do continue to look into that on your behalf. So Claire Barrett, Personal Finance Editor from the FT, signing off. If you would like to read more about this topic, can I refer you to my colleague Emma Agyemang's excellent article, How Could the Chancellor Raise Taxes?, which you can read at present on the FT website. Just go to ft.com/money. In the meantime, thanks from me, thanks from Nimesh. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye.